The public is conditioned to look for missile plumes. The media fixates on kinetic threats, a narrative reinforced by multi-trillion-dollar defense programs. Yet, these systems are a documented liability. As Reuters confirms, high-profile missile shields like the Golden Dome initiative mark years with little progress. The math is simple. The cost of the defensive interceptor will always exceed the cost of the offensive drone, as noted in publications like Small Wars Journal. This is a losing economic equation. This focus on missiles is a strategic misdirection. The decisive 21st century attack is not explosive, it is silent. Analysts at RUSI have confirmed the primary vulnerability, the undersea fiber optic cables that constitute the nervous system of global finance. These are not military secrets. Their locations are public, and they are fragile. The second silent vector is orbital, satellite blinding. A non-kinetic attack that does not destroy, but merely renders a multi-trillion-dollar intelligence and navigation apparatus inert. A targeted laser, a localized signal jam. There is no launch to detect, no debris to track. The result is systemic paralysis. This creates the strategic trap's deadliest component, the blind Leviathan. A nation-state, suddenly deafened and blinded, with its data flows severed and its global positioning lost. It retains its full kinetic and nuclear arsenal, but has lost all situational awareness. It cannot see who attacked or determine the scale of the damage. It is a superpower reduced to a cornered animal. Conventional war is a relic of a solvent age. The modern state is not projecting power, it is servicing debt. According to analysis from the New York Times, record debt is a systemic condition in the world's most powerful nations. When the cost of servicing that debt exceeds the political will to tax the population, the state enters a solvency crisis. The primary function of government shifts from citizen welfare to institutional survival. War becomes an instrument of financial policy, a violent, kinetic form of restructuring. CSIS analysts identify this protocol in the Russian Federation's recent kinetic operations. A prolonged, conventional war is a domestic liability. It is a massive, unpopular capital burn. The objective was never a simple territorial acquisition. It was to externalize a terminal domestic crisis. A state teetering on insolvency cannot afford the kinetic cost of a peer-to-peer conflict. The legacy military becomes a financial anchor, forcing a systemic pivot away from symmetric engagement. This weakness is not a bug. It is the central feature of the new strategic environment. It forces a mandatory evolution. Unable to afford a conventional response, the state must seek leverage elsewhere. The pivot to asymmetry is a mathematical certainty, not a strategic choice. It is the only remaining path for an insolvent entity to project power and maintain credibility without triggering total financial collapse. The blueprint shifts from expensive, high-signature platforms to low-cost, deniable vectors. The entire strategic equation has been inverted by a simple calculation. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, puts the kinetic cost in stark terms. A $5 million main battle tank can be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not a balanced fight. It is an economic execution. The cost-benefit ratio for the attacker is 10,000 to 1. This is what strategists call the democratization of violence. The state's monopoly on high-impact kinetic force has been broken. The barrier to entry for projecting power has collapsed from the price of a fighter jet to the price of a consumer electronic. As documented by outlets like Small Wars Journal, these systems are proliferating globally at an exponential rate, creating a saturated threat environment. For a nation already in a solvency crisis, this asymmetry is a death sentence for its conventional military. Each tank, Each ship, each aircraft becomes a high-value liability, a $5 million target waiting for a $500 projectile. You cannot financially sustain a defense against an adversary who can bankrupt you through attrition, trading their pocket change for your crown jewels. The front line is no longer a border. It is a vector. While legacy media focuses on distant regional instability, analysts at CSIS note these are merely proxy laboratories. The real staging grounds are not over there. They are already here. A Department of State list confirms 10 do not travel warnings for countries whose nationals were previously granted temporary protected status inside the U.S. This isn't an immigration debate. It is a clinical assessment of internal vector proliferation. The gray zone has been imported. External events in locations like Canada or South Africa serve as beta tests for asymmetric tactics against Western infrastructure. These are not organic collapses. They are controlled experiments in systemic disruption, monitored by state and non-state actors. The data on response times, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and psychological impact is harvested, refined, and prepared for deployment in primary target zones. The playbook is being written in real time, using less defended states as a blueprint. The weapon of choice for this new battle space is economic asymmetry. The Small Wars Journal documents the weekly proliferation of low-cost, high-lethality drones. The kinetic cost to launch an attack is now in the hundreds of dollars. The defensive cost is orders of magnitude higher. As Reuters reported, flagship projects like the Golden Dome missile shield show little progress, rendering billion-dollar systems a strategic liability against a swarm of cheap assets. The math doesn't lie. Defense is an insolvent proposition. This creates the strategic trap. The New York Times confirms the nation is already past the point of solvency, buried under record debt. Unable to afford a conventional police action against thousands of potential domestic and proxy zone threats, and with high-cost defenses proven ineffective, the state is systemically cornered. When an inevitable kinetic event occurs, the only remaining lever to project strength and maintain credibility is not defense, but disproportionate response. The protocols must shift from deterrence to preemption. The core of strategic deterrence is not the weapon itself, but the enemy's belief you will use it. This is maintained by a protocol known as launch on warning. As documented by strategic bodies like RUSI, this doctrine dictates that a nuclear-armed state initiates a retaliatory strike upon detecting an incoming enemy launch, before the incoming warheads detonate. The time for decision is not hours, it is minutes. Waiting for kinetic impact risks the total loss of one's own retaliatory arsenal in a first strike, rendering the deterrent useless. This system presumes one critical asset, accurate data. Now, introduce the fog of digital war. An adversary understands that a nation crippled by debt, as cited by the New York Times, cannot sustain a prolonged conventional conflict. They also know its conventional missile defenses are a high-cost liability with questionable efficacy, a fact underscored by reports from outlets like Reuters. The kinetic cost to overwhelm such a shield is high. The cost of a cyber attack is near zero. A targeted cyber attack does not need to destroy infrastructure. It only needs to blind the early warning radar and satellite feeds. The commander in the bunker is now staring at a blank screen. The data vacuum is absolute. Is the system blind because of a simple network failure, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike? There is no way to know. The window for verification is closing with every second. In this scenario, the commander is forced into a zero-sum decision based on fear, not fact. Launching on a false alarm means global annihilation. Not launching could mean the end of his nation. For a state that is already insolvent and cannot afford to rebuild or fight a conventional war, the mathematical imperative shifts. The only remaining lever of credibility is its ultimate weapon. CSIS analysts warn this is the most probable escalation vector. A cyber attack forces a launch decision, effectively lowering the nuclear threshold from a last resort to a default protocol in the face of uncertainty. A system's credibility is not measured by its stated power, but by its response protocol under stress. The liability of conventional defenses, as documented by Reuters, is a known variable. When a multi-trillion-dollar missile shield shows little progress, it is not a technical failure. It is an open invitation for a cost-benefit analysis by an adversary. This vulnerability is compounded by a systemic solvency crisis, with record debt, cited by the New York Times, removing the financial capacity for a sustained, conventional kinetic response. The attack vector is no longer a carrier group, it is a downloadable blueprint. The proliferation of low-cost, high-impact drone technology, detailed in publications like Small Wars Journal, provides the hardware. CSIS reports confirm the weaponization of commercial platforms. The software is the exploitation of internal vectors, populations displaced or holding transient status from regions under do not travel warnings, as outlined in federal data. This convergence creates a mathematical certainty for an attribution impossible event. Within the next 12 months, expect a calibration shot against critical U.S. economic infrastructure. The objective is not mass casualties, but systemic disruption, forcing an escalatory choice. A coordinated drone swarm, utilizing GPS jamming and localized EMP bursts, will neutralize the digital backbone of a primary container port, likely Los Angeles or Long Beach. The kinetic cost to the attacker is negligible. The event will paralyze billions in trade and will be officially designated a cascading grid failure. The true purpose is to test the solvency to escalation protocol in real time, measuring precisely how close an insolvent nation is to a launch on warning posture.